Sister made false abuse claims. Family disowned me. Now years later, they want to make amends. Back in 2002, when I was 18 and fresh out of high school, life was looking up. I'd just gotten accepted into a top engineering school, and I was excited to start this new chapter. Growing up, my home life was okay, but I always felt like I was in the background compared to my younger sister, Emma, the family's golden child. I'd always been the smart kid, but instead of getting praised for my achievements, I was met with nothing but expectations. Messing up wasn't an option, and when I did, the punishment was harsh. One time when I was 16, I forgot to lock the front door, and my parents took my car away for a whole month. Any success I had was just seen as meeting the baseline. There was never any big celebration, just a quick, good job before moving on. Emma, on the other hand, was treated like a little princess from the start. No matter what she did, there was always an excuse for her behavior. Sure, she'd get a talking to, but the consequences were usually pretty light. She wasn't a bad student, just average, but she excelled physically. By middle school, she was already competing at a high level in gymnastics, which meant our lives often revolved around her practices and competitions. Even my birthdays would get hijacked so she could show off her latest routine. So, when she finally quit gymnastics in 7th grade, I was thrilled, not just because I didn't have to hear about it anymore, but also because I wouldn't have to endure those never-ending meets. Fast forward to the end of my freshman year of college, and I was back home for our family's big Memorial Day BBQ. It was a huge event with extended family, friends, and my dad's co-workers all showing up. My first year of college had been incredible. I made the dean's list, joined the shooting club, made a bunch of friends, and even met my girlfriend Sarah, who I'd been dating for 8 months. But that day, it seemed like no one cared. The whole focus was on my sister making all-state in pole vaulting as a high school freshman. Out of everyone there, only 2 people even bothered to ask how I was doing at college. But honestly, that was nothing new to me. My ability to build engines from scratch was apparently nothing compared to Emma's pole vaulting skills. I'd grown used to it. Then came Thanksgiving, and things took a turn. I was still doing great, better than ever, actually. I'd just been selected for a summer internship in the UK, mostly paid for by a scholarship, but I still needed some extra funds. My dad, surprisingly, offered to cover all my remaining expenses and was genuinely proud of me for once. Around this time, Emma finally messed up in a way that even my parents couldn't ignore. She got caught doing something highly inappropriate with a classmate in the school parking lot, and to make matters worse, they found pot in her backpack. She was suspended for 10 days, and her car got taken away for a month. I couldn't help but find it ironic that my punishment for forgetting to lock a door was on par with her getting busted for drugs and public indecency, but I kept that thought to myself. I was just happy to be in the spotlight for once. At our family dinner that weekend, I was the center of attention. For once, everyone was talking about me, not Emma and her latest sports achievement. The disappointment aimed at her was a first, and I'll admit, it felt good to finally be seen. I went back to college that Sunday night, staying at Sarah's place. That was the last normal night of my life. The next day, I came back to my dorm after class and found an email from my dad waiting for me. It said, "Ryan, your sister has come forward with accusations of horrific things you've done to her. I can't understand how you could do something so vile, especially to your own sister. This explains her recent troubles, but knowing you are the cause breaks my heart. You have torn this family apart. I've already told our immediate family about what you did. Don't bother contacting them. The only reason we're not taking legal action is to protect your sister from having to face you. You've hurt her enough. From this point on, you are no longer my son. I will be legally disowning you. Do not contact us again." Panicked and confused, I started frantically calling the house, then my dad's cell phone, but no one answered. I tried several other immediate family members, but it was the same. Silence. After what felt like 100 calls, I finally dialed Emma's cell, desperate for any kind of response. This time, the call was answered. But it wasn't Emma on the other end. It was my father. I could hear hysterical crying in the background. I begged him to explain what was going on, but he cut me off, telling me not to act dumb. He said the only reason he even picked up was because he couldn't believe I'd have the nerve to call Emma directly. He called me a monster and asked how I could have done something so terrible to my own sister. I tried to defend myself, to explain, but he wasn't interested. He warned me that if I ever contacted them again, by phone, in person, or any other way, he'd go straight to the police. This was my last warning. Disappear from their lives, or he'd make sure I ended up on the sex offender registry for the rest of my days. Devastated, I went to Sarah for support and told her everything. She tried to comfort me, but I could tell she was uneasy. Something was off, and she eventually asked me to head back to my dorm for the night. I felt crushed being sent away, but I tried to convince myself she just needed space. When I got back to my room, my roommate Tyler was there, acting like his usual self. Tyler and I had been tight since freshman year, best friends really, but after I told him what happened, he seemed uncomfortable too. He tried to be supportive, more than Sarah had been, but something had changed. By the next day, I could feel both of them starting to pull away from me. Over the next week, things fell apart fast. Sarah broke up with me in a crowded cafe with her brother and cousin nearby for backup. At least, she didn't just ghost me, I guess. Meanwhile, Tyler requested an emergency room change and was moved out. They both figured there was no way my family would disown me unless I had done something truly awful. They assumed I was guilty, just like everyone else. Within a week, I lost everyone who mattered to me. I was 20 years old, completely alone, and clueless about what to do next. It's been just over 10 years since then, and every day has been a struggle. Being cut off and shunned by everyone close to you changes you in ways you never see coming. I was just getting by, pushing through life one day at a time, until yesterday, when an unexpected letter showed up in my mailbox. It was from my mom and dad, pages long, full of apologies and a plea for reconciliation. Apparently, after all these years, Emma finally confessed. She had lied about everything. I had spent years dreaming of this moment, but now that it's here, I'm not sure what to do. The pain and the loss, can that really ever be healed? Do I take this chance at closure that I've wanted for so long? Or do I just let it all stay in the past and keep moving forward? As I mentioned in my last post, I got a letter from my parents saying that Emma had admitted the abuse allegations were false. They wanted forgiveness and to reconnect, and they'd even included their phone and email contact info. I sat on this for a few days trying to process it when another letter arrived, this one from Emma. Inside the envelope were two separate letters, one about her life since I was banished, and the other was her confession to me. In her confession, she explained that it was actually her husband who convinced her to come clean. She couldn't even do it on her own. She said she regretted everything, but at the time, she was just angry and upset about the shame and judgment she was facing from the family. She needed an excuse for why she was acting out, so she made up a story that I had abused her over the summer. She figured this would explain her behavior with drugs and promiscuity. My parents, always quick to defend her, believed every word. In reality, she was just a typical teenager doing typical teenage stuff. But because my parents had always seen her as perfect, they couldn't handle the truth. She admitted she hadn't expected my dad's reaction to be so extreme. She liked being the center of attention again, but she was terrified to backtrack once things escalated. The way I was completely cast out and threatened only made her more scared to tell the truth. My parents initially planned to go to the authorities, but she panicked, pleading with them not to, claiming she couldn't face me in court. That plea was just another layer of her lie, driven by fear of being found out. Once I was gone, and it became clear I wasn't coming back, Emma told herself she'd keep this secret forever. It was her burden to bear. The mental gymnastics she pulled off, I swear. It wasn't until she got married 3 years ago that she even thought about coming clean. and only because of her husband. He had learned about the abuse from a relative and brought it up with her, but she downplayed the whole thing. Over time, he started to get suspicious since she didn't show any typical signs of a survivor of assault. After pressing her for a while, she finally admitted the truth. He's been pushing her to confess ever since. He's honestly too good for my family and doesn't deserve to be stuck with them. Now that she has a 6-month-old daughter and has given my parents their first grandchild, she feels safe knowing she'll never face the same consequences I did. So now she wants to unburden her conscience and ask for forgiveness. Still, it's all about Emma. She ended her letter by begging me not to share her full confession with our parents. Her husband made her send it to me, but she had only given Mom and Dad the watered-down version of a scared little girl too frightened to admit her lies. She's even pushing for me to be invited to Christmas in a few weeks, where we can supposedly start being a family again. Are you kidding me? As painful as that confession was to read, the life update was even worse. Emma went on about how great her high school years were, how she landed a track scholarship to the University of Iowa, how she met her husband, and how they now have a big house and a newborn daughter. She's been living the dream for the last 10 years. Meanwhile, I lost my family, my girlfriend, and my best friend. My grades plummeted as I drowned my sorrows in alcohol during that first lonely semester. I missed out on the UK internship, and my spot went to someone else. I sank so low that I once sat on the edge of a bridge for 4 hours, too broken to jump, but too lost to step back. Since I couldn't bring myself to end it, I figured I'd get myself killed instead. I dropped out of school and joined the Marines as the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were raging. I excelled in training and ended up in EOD, the team that handles explosives. I thought for sure that dealing with IEDs would do me in. But 8 years later, I left the service still in one piece. During those years, I had few friends and even fewer relationships. When everyone you care about has abandoned you, you learn to keep your distance. I'd go on dates, things would go well, and then she'd miss a text, and I'd spiral, ending it before she could leave me. I couldn't risk anyone walking out on me again. I had no close friends. In Iraq, I trusted my fellow Marines with my life, but never with my heart. I kept everyone at arm's length. The only exception was Ethan, my closest friend and the only one I've kept. When we both got out, I moved to West Virginia to be near him and his wife. They just had a baby girl 7 months ago, and I'm proud to say I'm Uncle Ryan. My life looks nothing like I thought it would when I graduated high school. I still haven't finished college. I work in a small factory and live in a 1-bedroom apartment, driving a car with 300,000 miles on it. I've saved a decent amount from my years in the military, living frugally, but it just sits there, unused. Meanwhile, Emma got to go to college, fall in love, and live the perfect life. It's not fair, and it's even more insulting that my parents are asking me to make the trek to Iowa to join their Christmas, the first one I've been invited to in 10 years. I've considered therapy, maybe that would help, but I'm torn. Do I finally face them and get the closure I've dreamed of, or do I just keep pushing forward on my own? There are 17 days until Christmas Eve. I've been invited to meet with my family, but 2 nights ago, tragedy struck. My closest friend, Ethan, suffered an unimaginable loss. His daughter, Michelle, my honorary niece, passed away from SIDS. This pain is worse than anything I've felt in the last decade. I should tell you about Ethan and his wife, Rachel. They aren't your typical people. They live mostly off the grid, running on propane and solar power, drawing water from their own well. They're not reliant on the usual systems, but they did everything to keep their daughter healthy. She was born at home, but they still took her to a pediatrician, kept her up to date with vaccinations. They're different, but they loved their daughter deeply. I'm sharing this because of what we spent today doing. Early this morning, Ethan and I built a tiny casket for Michelle, where she will be laid to rest. We also dug her grave on Ethan's family land. Tomorrow, we'll gather his father and we'll hold the funeral. It'll just be the four of us. I know it's not legal, but this is how they want to say goodbye, and I'll respect that. Update. The funeral was a quiet, heartbreaking experience, but it gave me a moment of clarity. I need to do this. If not for myself, then for Ethan and Rachel. I've decided to accept my family's offer. Update 2. I'm 2 days away from heading to Iowa. I've booked myself a decent hotel. I decided against going cheap this time. I also rented a car since mine is too old for a trip like this. I'll get there on December 23rd, get settled in, and the next night I'll be meeting my family at my parents' new home. They moved from Illinois after Emma's sophomore year, probably to make it harder for me to find them. I asked them to let me follow them on social media, and they happily agreed. I've been scrolling through 10 years of moments I missed, seeing how they've aged, learning about their lives, and familiarizing myself with the house I'll be walking into. I've spent part of every day since Michelle's passing with Ethan and Rachel. They're incredibly strong people. Despite their pain, they've done everything they can to help me get ready for this trip. This is what real family looks like: support, sacrifice, being there for each other. I couldn't face this or find the closure I've been searching for without them. I'll make sure to update everyone who has shown me so much support as soon as I can. It might take some time, but I'm ready to face this difficult emotional journey. It's been a long time, but for those who've been following, here's my update. Some of you may know parts of the story, but I've always said if you really want to know, you'd have to read about it here like everyone else. I showed up at my parents' house 30 minutes late on purpose. I wanted to be the last one there, so I could get all the greetings and awkward moments out of the way at once. Christmas Eve was a smaller affair. My 2 grandmas, 1 grandpa, my aunt and uncle, their son and his wife, my parents, my sister Emma, her husband Billy, poor guy, and their daughter Ivy. The only people who hadn't cut me off were Billy and Ivy. They all wanted to hug me, and I let them, just to keep things from getting even more uncomfortable. I had a few presents with me, heavier than they looked, but I didn't let on. They all said I didn't need to bring anything, but for me, it was part of showing up fully. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I placed the 2 big gifts under the tree, right in the front where everyone could see. I made small talk, got the house tour, and dropped off a few smaller presents in different rooms when no one was looking. After about 45 minutes, they announced it was time for presents. I took that moment to ask Emma if we could talk privately for a few minutes. She agreed, probably expecting it. She asked if holding the baby counted as privacy, and I told her it did. We stepped outside. The night was cold, but not bitter, and the fresh air felt good. Before I could even speak, she started apologizing, thanking me for not telling our parents the full truth. I stopped her and said I had something for her in my car. She smiled and said, "Sure." I went to the car, grabbed a small remote, and handed it to her. She looked confused, holding it with a puzzled smile, and asked, "What's this?" I told her, "Just push it. You'll see." The setup had 3 steps. Once Emma pressed the button, the presents under the tree would burst open, revealing sprayers attached to rotating cylinders, dousing the living room with accelerants. It was a testament to the engineering skills I never got to use. The 3rd phase ignited the flares, setting the accelerants ablaze. Everyone was gathered in front of the tree. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The smaller packages in other rooms weren't even necessary. The placement of the big ones was spot on. I only set them up because I'd gathered from social media posts that those areas offered the best escape routes if anyone managed to get out of the living room. The light from the big window looking into the living room was blinding. Emma's face was frozen in terror, but only for a second. I pulled out my 9mm from under my jacket and shot her in the left kneecap. I then fired a few rounds through the window, making sure the flames had plenty of air to spread. The house erupted in flames. I looked down at Emma, clutching Ivy in a death grip, her eyes filled with sheer horror. I knew prying the baby from her hands would be a struggle, so I put another round in her shoulder to loosen her hold. Once Ivy was in my grasp, I held her up to Emma, who was sobbing uncontrollably. I stared down at her and said, "Take a good look. This is all because of you. If you had never lied, none of this would have happened. If you hadn't confessed, none of this would have happened. If you hadn't pushed for me to be invited tonight, none of this would have happened. Look at Ivy, because this is the last time you'll ever see her. You will never find her." I knew I had to move quickly. The sirens were finally audible, cutting through the screams echoing from inside the house. I made my way to my car, where I'd set up a small box in the front seat for Ivy. It wasn't the safest, but we weren't going far. I drove calmly, taking my time to keep things steady, and headed to the meeting point, just 6 minutes away. When I pulled into the abandoned lot behind the old warehouse we'd scoped out earlier, Ethan and Rachel were already waiting. I told them everything went off perfectly. I handed over little Michelle to Rachel, who kissed my cheek. I hugged Ethan one last time, and he called me brother. I got back in my car and drove the 6 minutes back to my parents' house. As I approached, I could see paramedics attending to Emma, who was completely hysterical. I parked 2 blocks away, stripped down to my compression shorts, put my hands behind my head, and walked straight towards the officers on the scene. The rest, as they say, is history. I'm serving a life sentence with no chance of parole. I still feel guilty about Billy. He was a good guy who just happened to marry the wrong person. This past December, after our agreed-upon 10 years of no contact, I received a letter from Ethan. As planned, he'd used a series of acquaintances to forward it, making sure it couldn't be traced. In his handwriting, it simply read, "All is well." They never found Ivy, and they never found Ethan or Rachel. They got to live the life I'd always wanted. I'm genuinely happy for them, especially for little Michelle. I'm sorry it took another 6 months after the 10-year wait to share this update with everyone who followed my story. I told the detectives then, and I've told them every time since. If they really wanted to know what happened that night, they'd have to read about it on Reddit like everyone else. They didn't believe me, but when Netflix came knocking with a money offer for an interview, they suddenly found a way to get a phone in my hand so I could post. I was thrilled when my old login still worked. Finally, thank you to everyone who followed, supported, and advised me over the years. This documentary is for you. It's going to be a 4-part limited series. Other shows have covered my story before, but this is the first one I've agreed to speak with, and they've promised to update me on Emma's life. The producers told me she's still out there, never remarried, never moved on, endlessly searching for the daughter she'll never find. Knowing that she finally understands what it's like to feel this kind of loss makes me feel lighter, like a massive weight has been lifted off my shoulders. This is my closure, final and absolute.